Before I dive into Bartram's travels through Alabama and how you can follow it, I wanted to talk a little bit about, let's see if I can get this sorted out. Right here in Montgomery, there's a lot to do, more than just the Hank Williams Museum. First of all, the Alabama Department of Archives and History, you'll see the museum this afternoon. The archives of the Bartram Trail Conference is here. So that there's a lot to see here. Beyond that, Montgomery has become a mecca for civil rights tourism. All the new museums, tomorrow morning, Diane and I are going to the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, because the first time I wanted to come, you had to get tickets 6 months in advance or more. So there's quite a bit to do here. And there's Old Alabama Town and Riverfront Park, so maybe go down to the river at some point. Old Alabama Town, the archives, is a collection of structures, historic structures from the early 1800s into the 20th century that portray everyday life, how people lived in Montgomery. I like it because it doesn't dwell upon wars and who the general was. But I think the most important thing in Old Alabama Town is this building, Lucas Tavern, which was built about, well, the eastern suburbs of Montgomery and Wall. And it was one of the most famous taverns and lodging places on the old Federal Road. And it was known for its hospitality. And whereas a lot of the places you could stay on the old Federal Road were known for being miserable. It was built in 1818, and in 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette lodged in this building. It's been moved to Old Alabama Town. This is what it looked like in its original location in 1950. So let's get on with how to follow Bartram. Everybody has their program with 3 maps in it. Maps going east from Montgomery to Fort Mitchell, and the maps going south had to break into 2 maps in order to get enough detail. But this red dotted line is what I think is Bartram's route in this area. A lot of where Bartram went in Alabama is easy to follow because the trading route became the old post road in 1805, became the old Federal Road in 1810, and it's well documented. Except around Montgomery, you'll notice the yellow is the old Federal Road. Bartram traveled along the Tallapoosa River, and the old Federal Road stayed away from the villages, probably for good reason, because the construction of this road was one of the things that caused the First Creek War. Once it was expanded into a military road, Georgians started moving to Alabama with their families and their slaves and taking up cotton land in the South. There are several villages I want to talk about. A lot of the Creek villages that he visited, of course, they're not there anymore. You can't go to a lot of places and stand there and be overwhelmed with the presence of Bartram. You just know that he was there. The land along the Tallapoosa River was good cotton land, and now it's good soybean land. But the Alabama Town is at Fort Toulouse. We'll get to that in a minute. Coulommiers, I think at the time Bartram came, James, Germany was on the south side of the river and the town was on the north side of the river. But at one time the town was on the south side of the river, and that place on the Tallapoosa River is now the Creek Wind Montgomery Hotel and Casino that's owned by the Porch Indians. I don't know anything about the archaeology that's been done there. And between Fort Toulouse and Wetumpka, the Creek Indian a famous place called Hickory Ground, is Creek Wind Casino Wetumpka, or they call it Creek Wind Wetumpka. So those are two important sites that the Creek Indians have reclaimed in some way. And Otasi is near where Fort Decatur was, so someday maybe when Fort Decatur becomes available to public visitation, we can see that area. But what would you see along this way? If you don't do anything else, go to Fort Toulouse, because it was a French Fort Toulouse, an American fort, Fort Jackson. There was an Alabama town there. There was a town in the park at one time named Pecana. Probably towns since prehistory, dating to 8,000 years ago or so. It's a confluence of the Coosa and Tallapoosa River, and it's an excellent place to have a town. When you leave Fort Toulouse, and you feel so inclined, you can travel to Jasmine Hill Gardens, and you can look north, and you can see the Wetumpka Impact Crater, which I did not know about until a few years ago. It was a crater of several hundred yards wide that crashed into, this was ocean, into 100 feet of water. And it was unknown for quite a while until some geologists in the late 20th century figured out that it was there. Let's go back here. You can travel fairly close to where Bartram went by taking these roads on the north side of the Tallapoosa River. Then it gets a little tricky. Just south of Tallahassee was the town of Tuckabatchee, which was one of the largest towns in the southeastern United States at the time. And this is what the area looks like now. So that's pretty exciting, isn't it? Soybeans. And now there's a factory there, GKN Composite Structural Materials. They make struts and all kinds of support material for aircraft and automobiles. And on the tour, I think that Bartram passed through what's now the town of Tuskegee. And it's a beautiful campus to walk on, but more importantly, the George Washington Carver Museum that's there, it's a museum of the historic district, George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington. George Washington Carver's personality was so much like that of William Bartram. Carver was a botanist, he was a chemist, he was an artist, he painted, and he was a gentle spirit, and he was spiritual. And those are all things we think of when we think of William Bartram. This is the other part of the Eastern trip. And there are two question marks here because from the old map, it's hard to figure out where Bartram traveled. The old Federal Road came this way, but Bartram went up and over, I think it's called Euphaupe Creek. And he either passed through Tuskegee or he passed through Tuskegee National Forest. And my thinking is that looking at the topography, probably the trail passed through Tuskegee. If I was riding a horse, that's the way I would go. But look right here, Slosh Eye Road. I can't find anything about this road or the word Slosh Eye, except for there is a Slash Eye Trail in Georgia, and maybe there's some connection. But I think that Slosh Eye Road is a remnant of an old trading path to Tallahassee that just kept getting used. Working with the old maps, that's what I come up with. And also, we're pretty certain that Bartram followed a trail that is Uchee Road and Sandfort Road. So in Tuskegee National Forest, there's just south of where the office is, there's a Bartram Trail marker. And there is the Bartram National Historical Trail. I can't remember how many miles long it is. It's about 20 miles, I believe. It was established back in the early 1980s when there was the big flurry of activity about William Bartram. All the markers were being put up. They were building trails. Then we get to Slosh Eye Road. And it's one of those places where when you're following in Bartram, a lot of times you're in suburbs, you're in a town. There's not a lot that's exciting unless you can get to a natural area where there's parks that preserve some nature. But you can stop here on Slosh Eye Road and just kind of walk up and down the road and think about William Bartram. And there's not going to be any traffic, I can guarantee you. Then on Uchee Road, we come to Good Hope Baptist Church. And of course, there was nothing there when Bartram came through. I mean, there was no church. But it's a beautiful setting. And when I've been there, I've enjoyed just walking in the yard in front and imagine that William Bartram rode his horse right there in front of this church. And maybe Catherine can tell us, why is there only half a church? Did the rest of it fall in? And our route takes us to Oswechee, which is a close enough point to Apalachicola that that's where the Bartram Trail marker is. And you will notice that it, like many of the old markers, says that he was botanist to the King of England. And he wasn't. It was his father that was the botanist to the King of England. Now we're over near the Chattahoochee River in Russell County. Near Apalachicola, he discovered a plant that he wrote about, Aesculus parviflora, which is bottlebrush buckeye, and its natural area is the Chattahoochee River, Alabama River, and it's now become a very popular landscape plant. North of Oswechee is Uchee Creek, and Uchee Town, that William Bartram, the first creek town he visited after crossing the Chattahoochee River, was in here. It is now the Uchee Campground, which is the United States Army. Fort Benning has that. And I went there maybe 20 years ago, and they do have a kiosk about Uchee Town. I think that I haven't been there since then. I think you can still drive in and drive back out, but it's really for military. They don't, and they frown upon anybody else coming through. Then you get to Fort Mitchell, which is a little bit north of where Bartram came through, but it's a place where you can go and get an experience. There's some historic buildings from when the Federal Road crossed here, and there was a Creek agency here. There was a school for Creek Indian children. And part of the Fort Mitchell Park is the Creek Trail of Tears Monument. It's on top of a hill, and it's got a nice view across into the Chattahoochee River. It's got the names of each of the families that were rounded up to go out west. Now we're going to go south to Stockton, Alabama. And this is one of my favorite parts of traveling in Alabama. Once you leave Montgomery and you get down past Pentlala, you're following, just outside of Greenville, the old Federal Road and William Bartram's route follows the county line between Monroe and Conecuh County. So all you have to do is just make sure you stay on the county line, and there are only a few places where there's not a road that follows it, and you're following in Bartram's footsteps. There are a few places where it's unpaved, and I don't know with the rain whether you could get very far. Diane and I traveled this road 2 years ago when we were going to Baton Rouge, and it was a beautiful spring day. The sun was shining, the ground was dry. It was like an incredibly beautiful trip. And, you know, like some people say, there ain't nothing in here because it's staying, the towns are either to the west across the river or to the east. And you go through little communities that were bigger at one time in the early 1900s. So let's see what you can see on this part of the Bartram Trail. The thing to do is just leave Montgomery, go down to Hope Hull, get off the interstate, and you go through Pentlala. The old Federal Road is just about a mile west of here, and you can travel on a few miles of old Federal Road and know that you're following Bartram's footsteps. And there was a famous tavern that was owned by, was it David Moniac? Sam Moniac. David was the son, the first Indian to go to West Point. His tavern was in that section of the Federal Road, and it was a very famous tavern. Then you go through Fort Deposit, and Fort Deposit was not a place when Bartram came through, but it became a supply depot during the First Creek Indian War. Ferdinand Claiborne built this deposit and built a little fort here, but it was right on the old trail, and which became the Federal Road. As you approach Greenville, the site of Fort Dale, which was built in 1818, I believe, in the wake of the Ogle-Stroud massacre, Sam Dale built a stockade for a refuge for local families. But there is a Bartram Trail marker right next to it. There are some markers like this in Georgia. I know of 3. I think there used to be many more. In Georgia, they're green. In Alabama, it's brown. But that marker has been there since the early 1980s, and nobody's run into it or mowed it down yet. And as you're traveling along, it takes me so long to do this. I keep stopping. You can stop and have lunch in Greenville. It's a very pretty little town. Oops. Just north of the golf course that's in Butler County, on Sherling Creek Road, there's a new Bartram Trail marker. It was erected in 2006, I believe. But this marks the location of Bartram's dogwood forest, where there were no other trees, just a forest of dogwoods that he wrote about. And it became known as Dogwood Flats and the Flats when Americans started moving in. When the paved road stops and you start getting to dirt roads, Anderson Stage Stop, even though it's built in 1852, which to me seems late, the building is still there despite all of the abuse that has been heaped upon it. And I don't think that it operated very many years, because by 1852, the Federal Road was declining. There was not much need for it anymore other than local traffic, because by then people were using riverboats to ship things to Mobile. This is another reason why I like this section of the old Federal Road. It's a place where you can just walk up and down the road and just see what's in the ditches. And not much traffic, no houses. This is Middleton Road, which was a part of the old Federal Road, and this is right next to Middleton Cemetery, and some of the victims of the Stroud-Ogle massacre of 1818 are buried here. And this picture, I took it from the bank right next to the cemetery, because this is the exact same view that Francis Harper took his picture that's in the 1958 edition of Bartram's, naturalist edition of Bartram's Travels. And the trees then were a lot more mature. Apparently, obviously there's been clear cutting about 2 times since then. There's the community of Midway, and it's important because it was a place where several different trails came together. As you approach just north of Burnt Corn, I discovered this memorial that I had not seen before. I think it has been erected in the early 2000s. James Sauter, who was a Revolutionary War veteran, was given his veterans' land for his service in Alabama, but he couldn't take it up until sometime in the 18 teens because it just wasn't safe until that point to move in there. Okay, the very best spot on the old Federal Road, Burnt Corn, Alabama. I love coming to this town and parking and just walking around. And when I was working on this lecture, I was wondering if the old store was still in operation. It was the store in the post office, and it's not. And then when I was doing my research, nothing in the town tells you that it's called the Lowry Store. And I saw that that's what they call it there. And in our audience, we have a Lowry descendant, Jacob Lowry. So extend your hand to him whenever you meet him. It's during lunch or something like that. But when you're here, you know that if you stand on the yellow line in the middle of the road, that's where Bartram's horse was. There's not a lot of traffic, so do it. Okay, another break. We got about this far and we were getting tired. So we went into Monroeville for lunch and we went to the old courthouse, to the museum. It's a museum for Monroe County and a museum for To Kill a Mockingbird, because in the movie, the courthouse was seen, the interior is based on this courthouse, although it's recreated in Hollywood. It's a beautiful museum. They've got a nice shop, and you may also, the Alabama people know that Monroeville is the literary capital of Alabama. Let's see, I wrote down, besides Harper Lee and Truman Capote, Mark Childress, and Cynthia Tucker. I know Cynthia Tucker because she used to be the editor of the Atlanta-Constitution Journal. And that was when you used to subscribe to the Atlanta-Constitution Journal in Athens and have it delivered. And she was an excellent writer, still is an excellent writer. Moving on down the Federal Road and Bartram's route, just maybe a half mile off of where you'd be traveling is Splinter Hill Bog. And I have not been here yet. This was protected since I've been doing a lot of my work. I know Philip Juris has been here and did a painting of it. But you know that William Bartram wrote quite a bit about pitcher plants. And there's some controversy about, was he trying to talk about white-top pitcher plants, or was he did get confused because he was writing about the little hooded pitcher plant in Mobile, and it doesn't grow there. It grows in Florida and in Georgia. But anyway, anywhere you can find pitcher plants growing and blooming is a great place to be. Then we get to down near Huxford, a little detour to the Porch Band of the Creek Indians. Their history is really interesting because in the early 1900s, I don't think there was a porch. They weren't organized. They lived in the area. But since then, they have gotten Alabama recognition, but not federal recognition yet. And they are federally recognized. Catherine says they are federally recognized. And they have a museum now. And they have events each year, which I couldn't find out from their website if it's open to the public or not. But they have been very successful. They've in the hospitality industry and various other industries. Oh, it is? Okay. I believe they have a powwow or a homecoming every Thanksgiving. Then we end in Stockton, Alabama, the big city of Stockton. And there's a Bartram Trail marker here. He spent a lot of time around Stockton because this is where Robert Farmer's plantation was, just southwest of Stockton. While he was in this area, he discovered a phenomenal plant, the large flowered evening primrose. And I got some seeds from Joel Fry many years ago. I grew them in a seed tray and planted them out, and I've never had to plant them ever again because they pop up anywhere they want to, cracks in the wall, cracks in the sidewalk. And they bloom in late August, early September. They're pollinated by moths at night. And at night, they do have a nice scent to them. And they're just gorgeous. They're kind of rangy, so some people don't like those kinds of plants in their yards. But we live in the woods, and it looks like a wilderness anyway. While Bartram was at Farmer's Plantation, where it's stopped here, this is called the Tensaw Settlement at the time, right in here. He explored up north of Stockton by horse. He explored the Mobile and Tensaw River by boat. And then, of course, he went down to Mobile. So this is also part of the Bartram Trail. Get in a boat and travel. This is a map I put together, a Google map, just for this purpose. And I sent an email to everybody middle of last week that had the program in it, and it had a link to the online maps. And I can send another email out again if people need me to. But you can zoom in and see detailed roads. And I've got some sites along the way that we just talked about. And I'll leave this up at the end, but I've got one more thing I want to show you. That Raven Christopher's map, story map, which you can do with ArcGIS, of the Old Federal Road, a driving tour. And this is incredible. If you've got the time, you've got a lot more detail here. You can zoom in and you can see the little dirt roads, and you can see the sites. And then there's a description and photographs over here also. And this one is fairly easy. It's, I guess it's because it's a link. oldfederalroad.info. That's easy to remember, oldfederalroad.info. I unfortunately had to do a tiny URL in order to get mine up here. So I hope you do some of the Bartram Trail when you leave Montgomery to go home again. Unfortunately, if you're going north, you can go to Fort Toulouse, but maybe take a detour on your way home. Okay, thank you very much.
Randy?
Yahola. What does it mean?
Asi is the word for the drink, which the Creek, the Muskogee word really is white drink because it's a purifying drink. It's a very dark tea. So Europeans call it black drink, but Asi or Casina is the one. So the Asi and their Yahola is the singer. So, and of course, famous Osceola was one born very near here in Macon, what's now Macon County, and then after the Creek War, his family fled the area.
So does Yahola mean singer, or is that what they were singing?
It's what they were singing, and it probably means that's the title for the singer. And Bartram, the other person from the 18th century who tries to phonetically spell out some of those songs was James Adair. So if you read Adair's history, you can get a little bit of the sonic world of the 18th century. Yes, Bill.
You had mentioned that some of the historical markers confused William Bartram with his father.
Yes.
Was that true in the Baldwin County's time? Or could you describe how the mistake was made and what was King George's relationship with William Bartram?
Well, there was no relationship between King George and William Bartram other than his father, John Bartram, was the botanist to the king in North America. I guess King George knew that, but he paid John Bartram some money to go explore Florida. But I don't know how the mistake came about. It's just one of those things where...
I'll hazard a guess.
Okay.
All right. You notice that was not a Bartram Trail Conference marker, right? And so I won't say it was a state of Alabama marker, but I think it was. But one of the things that Bartram Trail Conference markers do is that if anyone requests a marker, they come to us and they say, we want to put a marker, and so we say, well, yes or no, Bartram went here. We also really work over the language, try to get a quote from Travels that describes the place. And so our signs are accurate. Some of the others, as you know, a lot of historic markers are not. And but they try hard. And some of those really need to be replaced as well. They're showing their age.
Yes.
So maybe we can get them replaced with Bartram Trail Conference markers. It has a nice impression of Bartram's head that Dorinda helped organize from a very famous artist to do a wax impression for our new redesigned markers, and that would be really good.
Another misleading thing on a lot of markers is it's got 1773 through 1777, and by January 1777 he was on his way back home again. So I guess literally we could say that, but it's kind of misleading.
Yeah. The dates in Travels are not necessarily correct.
Bartram wasn't really good at dates anyway.
No, like a lot of us.
I really don't want to contribute here, but markers are kind of my thing. So that's, I found that about a little over 30% had some kind of inaccuracy. Now, we can break down which ones were Bartram Trail. I haven't done that.
They're all accurate, yeah.
But it was actually one of the things I found quite surprising that about a third of them have some kind of either date, the state, which is understandable given Bartram also did that, or King James, King George's, whatever.
Well, in the early 1980s, when there was a big flurry of markers being erected, it was all being done by different entities. You know, the Federation of Garden Clubs in Florida, they did those, and then in Georgia, the Georgia Garden, they didn't have any coordination, which we have now.
You were saying that near Greenville was where the dogwoods were. I've heard people argue this back and forth. Do we really kind of know or are fairly certain that was the location he was talking about?
I think it's a little further south, and
I do too.
I don't know where it is on the ground, but I've recently found another. It's in Butler County somewhere. If this early history of Butler County, he actually says this place used to be called the Dogwoods, and it was a focus of early settlement. So somewhere in my notes I could probably figure out what township and range and section it was in. But I think it's a little further south.
South of where that marker is, there's a road called Shackelford Road, and it's the old federal road. It's somewhere along in there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
quite often, if you get the marker close, people are happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd like to pitch out something else here about the markers. Our understanding of exactly where these things are has changed over time with better scholarship or more close attention and some archaeology. So sometimes they're a little off, and people have an idea. Yeah, this was where this was, or whatever. But when you put up a historical marker, sometimes you just want to people want it in the general vicinity where people are going. But a lot of Bartram's route in the marking phase of the late 70s and early 80s was based on Francis Harper's work. And in Alabama, Francis Harper had an incredible guide. He had Peter Brannan, he was a longtime reader and student of Bartram's travels, and took him around and so forth, and also various other people in Alabama. But it goes, but I think Brannan was not responsible for that dogwood, Mark, because he has one of his wonderful little columns. He mentions some of the events that take place around there in the 1818 era, Creek War era. So research is ongoing.
You were mentioning the places to get off and see the Bartram Trail. If people are going north, I helped build the Bartram Trail, so I know how to get there. Here in Tuskegee, and it's very easy. I mean, at exit 42, all you have to do is turn right as you're heading toward Atlanta. Turn off, go right, cross over the creek. It's the first Forest Service road on the right, and you just go down a little ways. But the actual Bartram Trail goes off behind the parking lot, not where the sign is. So,
Brent, you had a question?
Just a couple of things. I was wondering if there was any that know the botanical origin of those dogwood groves. Were those cultivated or were they natural to that?
One of the reasons I had read was that a storm may have knocked down the pine trees, so there were no big pine trees or hardwoods, and the dogwoods were left and were able to just grow. And I read, a couple of years ago, I was reading I can't remember who it was, somebody traveling north. In that area, the year after or the year before Bartram had been there, heard about a storm had destroyed a forest nearby, so he went to look at it. And he said all the trees were just blown apart. And that was at the time Bartram, within a few years ago, Bartram went through there. So there may be some validity to that storm story, unless Catherine has another idea.
I think it could also be soil type. Yeah.
I also just wanted to add, if you're passing through Asheville, North Carolina, you can now get tea made out of Alex Von Victoria, about 3 coffee cups.
Yeah. There's also a packet at the auction from Texas. It's coming back into fashion. Yeah.
There's a tea outfit somewhere in Charleston that does
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
casino tea, casino tea.
Mm.
Yes.
So, are there any places yet unmarked that you all would like to mark? Besides, we've got a lot of signs out there that aren't used right, that are very neat. Anything?
We don't have very many in South Carolina.
That's true.
Yeah. And there seems to have been a lot of activity in Florida, Louisiana over the past few years. The coastal, Wilmington, Fayetteville, part of North Carolina. But South Carolina doesn't seem to be interested in William Bartram. They've got somebody else there,
Yeah.
Mark Catesby,
Yeah.
on the show.
Yeah. There are a few places in Alabama, those creek towns, but many of them are on private property and not very accessible. So, yeah,
That's
but
the thing is that all along the Tallapoosa River is beautiful farmland. And I'm sure there's been archaeology done on those sites, but we can't go there. So. Yes?
I'm curious about the Mobile Tensai Delta and his travels on the waterways there. Is that also where the Clotilde has been turned to be now?
Yes, the Clotilda was discovered just north of downtown Mobile, a few miles, a place called 12 Mile Island. And we don't know where the exact site is. I know that that's where it was, because they don't want anybody to know where the site is until they get it up. So, I don't think Bartram went by that area, because that's a western channel, and I think he came down through an eastern channel. Philip?
Is there a Bartram Trail marker devoted to the Black Belt Prairie that is right south of us, between here and Tintala would be in it?
no.
I mean, that was.
Yeah, that'd be a place.
That was an unbelievable pre-settlement landscape, just forgotten about, and Bartram beautifully described it. It deserves it.
Yeah. We'll work on it.
All the markers are, we have to have somebody locally who wants it. They help raise money for it. And there's a marker on Padgaliga Creek in Butler County, Georgia, in about 8 or 10 years ago, I just got a call one day from Ed Benz, who owns the land there, and they wanted to, the Historical Society wanted to put up a marker, and he was going to pay for it. And he got us to okay the wording. It's where Golden St. John's Wort. Bartram discovered gold in St. John's Wort, Hyperion from Dosum. So that was significant.
How much would a funder need to bring to the table?
What was that?
How much would it cost
For what? A marker?
to put a marker in?
It's about $1,600 or $1,700.
25.
What?
There's our,
TR.
Our markers are a little bit less expensive than some of the others. The last quote I had was short of $1,800.
Yeah, it goes up every other year, a couple of $100 or so. TR is in charge of the markers now. Going through him to get the wording done, and he gets them ordered. You pay for it.
and then get your county commissioner to dig a hole and put it up.